All right, everybody. Hello, hello, and welcome back. Bring my microphone closer to me. People complained last time that I'm not loud. I don't. But welcome back. To the Designer's Den. We are coming to you today from the past. That is to say, this is a pre-recorded session. I am planning, on being around on Twitch while it is airing. So if you've got questions, ask them anyways. If you have comments, post them anyways, because as always, we still enjoy to interact with everyone, and you know, your burning question probably never occurred to me. So that said, without further ado, get into it. I have today a very exciting guest, Matt Sanders, coming to the other side of the pond. Uh, I've gotten although I guess I've recorded a bunch of British people, but you're not going to all air in a so
Got to speed this out. All right.
yeah.
Okay.
um but Matt's been designing games for quite some time. A lot of my followers might not have heard of him so much because he's not so much doing D&D 5th edition stuff, definitely not on the DM's Guild. But
Not anymore.
yeah, not anymore. But nonetheless, is creating a lot of really great stuff. Matt, why don't you actually introduction? I'm sure you've got a elevator pitch.
Yeah, sure. I actually started out on Drive-Through with the DM's Guild doing 5e stuff, like a lot of people. And then I had I guess you could almost call it a wilderness year where I didn't really write or produce much. And then when I came back to writing, I got much more into producing things for other systems or system neutral things, or even kind of complete things of my own and selling them through different channels, and focusing a lot on not so much content, but systems. That's definitely been like the evolution of it, or systems to generate content. Maybe that's a better term for it.
And it's something that I'm kind of slowly working my way towards. I'm still definitely stuck in 5th edition and 5th adjacent type stuff right now, because I mean it's going to be hard for me to move away from it entirely because I'm a big play program. We just get into role-playing games, and further down that path. Okay, so you tried D&D. Now let me open your eyes.
Yeah, and I think if you've got a core audience of people who like that and buy that from you because that's what you do, it's hard to move away, and it's not necessarily even sensible to move away, right?
No, I mean, and for people where that's your bread and butter, I wouldn't necessarily entirely, but there's always something said for diversifying, and don't have all your eggs in the basket.
Yeah. That's a very significant point around around any single platform, and I think a lot of 5e creators really accidentally end up in that all their eggs in one basket situation.
And it's kind of actually, but so let's get into what we have to talk about today is a product that you made called We Sail Beyond, and it is we'll start with it is gorgeous. Was that it is gorgeous, beautiful, and I'll have the cover up in a moment. And it is like this entire little self-contained game. We've got your.
It's so when I originally started doing stuff like this, I called it like a game meant to be played within a game.
Mm-hmm. It can be, definitely.
Yeah, that's the. I wanted to produce things that anybody running any RPG, but specifically 5e players, could pick up and try in their 5e game. They didn't have to learn a new system or do something different. They could literally sit down at their weekly game and say, hey, let's play this thing within our existing campaign or as part of a new campaign or something like that. And that's what it does. It's a game within a game.
And I've actually a lot of those recently I don't want to pick up the book and someone else's work here for a second, but wonderful gigantic book I got recently. I was trying to explain to my partner Alan. He's like, "Is it 5e?" And I'm like, "No." Is it 5e compatible? Technically, no, but you could absolutely use it in 5e, and I think like that's a wonderful thing. And here is that gorgeous cover, and it is very colorful, very, very colorful, everybody. That was the first thing I noticed when I opened it up, and I'm like, oh, I love colors.
It continues to be colourful throughout as well.
Yeah.
That CMYK color scheme has been a very deliberate thing in all the sealed library stuff, but this is definitely the most maximalist version of it so far, because this is the first project where I've really had someone else with the skills to make it fantastic on board, rather than doing it myself, or getting it done in a let's get this laid out and ready to sell, rather than this being much more artistic,
Yeah, and I already heard you say the name of your layout artist, but I'm gonna butcher it if I try it, so I'm gonna let you.
It's Mateus Guox, or he goes by MA Guox on most platforms. I think you search for MA Guox, which is GUAX RPG, you'll find him pretty much everywhere.
And he absolutely does some beautiful. So
yeah,
we sail beyond, like you said. It's well, you'd need some paper, you need a pen, you need at least one die. Pretty simple.
Yeah, in fact, the die is technically optional, because if you come up with your own content, you don't use any of the tables, you don't even need the die.
Yeah, and you could always just be like, all right, players, you haven't seen the table, pick a number between 1 and.
Yeah, exactly. There's plenty of ways around it. And these days as well, if you've got a phone in your group, you've also got a die roller. So it's very.
Yeah, you can actually type it right into Google. Roll 1d20, 6, 7, whatever it is that you. My favorite aside that you've got in here in regards to the die is play number 3, at least 1 6-sided die, raid your Monopoly set if need be, and then burn the board.
You are not the first person to comment on that. Right from when I had the first draft of it, that was in there. And when I sent it to people, the first comment I got would be, love this. Screenshot of that particular section. That's
yeah, and then you kind of lead with some additional tips for how to kind of make it a little more immersive. Steps for aging your map, lighter, tea bags, lime juice, ink, rollers, rags, sponges, and that's something a lot of people really don't think about, because it really sets the scene to hand your players an aged, half burnt note, and they're like,
and to do it together. I think that's the real point of this is to get you to do something together at the table that normally would be the preserve of only the most hardworking of GMs, right? The people who put time and effort into it. I'd like to make that experience available to more people by doing it together, basically. And that process of, it gets called artifaction in some training circles, of producing the thing. It's kind of the best bit.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that's one of those things that between actual play face to face and then play online, it's become kind of an interesting thing, because there's all these ways to do the artifaction for virtual play that have become very it doesn't quite have the same feel, obviously, because you're not holding the map, but also kind of equally memorable. And I kind of like that people are embracing that more and more, about I want the bits and bobs.
Yeah. I think really, it's something we all learned and did in primary school, right? I'm pretty sure everybody made a treasure map in primary school and aged it with some tea. And it's just getting back in touch with you. You didn't do that?
I don't know that we would waste tea like that in the South, and I'm a bit surprised that you would waste tea like that over there. What did you use? Some Lipton tea bags, though? Was it?
Oh no, we don't. No, weirdly enough, Lipton's not really a thing here.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Some tea bags that aren't great.
Yeah. Well, I think it was primary school teacher's tea. I was 6. I wasn't concerned about where it came.
As you get older, though, you're like, why would you waste good tea?
What? You don't use good tea. You don't use good tea for aging.
No, comes though that's the only have.
Yeah.
Uh,
Um,
but yeah, so the purpose of We Sail Beyond is pretty much to have that experience with your players more than it being like a one-sided. I'm the game master and I've come up with everything and I've presented everything to and the adventure is what I said the adventure. More like we're doing the together. It is very, you know, it sounds kind of trite to be like it's a more collaborative role-playing experience.
Yeah. Well, it's normally the collaboration is asymmetric, right? Because the GM produces these things in a silo and brings them to the players who solve them collaboratively. And I've never particularly seen why that needs to be one-sided asymmetric collaboration. You can do the whole thing collaboratively, and this is sort of me writing some of those things down and trying to systematize them so that somebody who doesn't see that can copy it and do it. That's the attempt.
Yeah, I think it did well.
Yeah, there have been some people who there was one particularly notable guy on Twitter who just did not get it, and I didn't get involved, but some other people tried to explain it to him, and he just couldn't. He just didn't get it at all. That's Twitter sometimes, right?
Sometimes, yes. So is from my understanding from going through this and reading it, like the majority of, I guess I have here, not even sure. Pages spreads. Yes, is a lot of the actual document itself that you get is like how to create the world versus so much like here's what's in your world. It is very much a very free form thing. You choose characteristics. It's a hex crawl. You're creating a hex crawl first off. So for people who love hex crawls, down with the grid. I'm a grid player, but I do appreciate a beautiful hex crawl.
I see. I'm grid for combat, hex crawl for world map. You see, that's where I sit on that. Yeah, it's the idea behind it is that you create this world, but it is both a system and then kind of almost pure role play if you want it to be, because you take on the role of some adventurer in a tavern talking about a place he's been and trying to sell the party a map he's drawn of it. But then the guy next to him has another story about that place that kind of exaggerates or embellishes. It builds on what other people say that's where the collaboration comes in. That someone has part of an idea and someone else expands upon it, and that's where you get like richness from. And that's what normally happens when it's solving a problem in play, but here we just apply it to world building instead.
I like that because you always have like the different perspectives on somewhere. Like the first people who go and explore a place, like if you don't really get beyond the coastal areas and you've only met the people who live along that area, if it's a huge landmass, like you don't have a full picture of the place versus someone who arrived there, they saw the coastal area there and they're like, oh, you're very nice people, but I see mountains and I like mountains, I'm gonna keep going. And they get over there and they find an entirely different environment, and they're like, okay, no, I heard what you were saying, and like, yes, the coastal land is beautiful, but like that's not the entire place. You're really like selling the place short. They're like,
and that when then these people who have been and seen different parts of it come home and share all that information that is going to be slightly contradictory and slightly warped through the lens of memory, and they weren't very good at drawing maps anyway, you get this like mishmash of information that's what the players come up with, and then have to work with, right? That's the world they're off to, is all those rumors, and they probably don't all fit together, but then you're not actually, I'm doing an aside here, but you're not beholden to a canon because it doesn't make sense in the first place. It isn't consistent or logical, so you're not beholden to it.
No, and actually one of the little sections here, at a certain point in the tale, you get to the embellishing the quest section. This is where everyone competes to outdo one another with like outlandish. You use whatever initiative mechanic it is to determine who gets to go first, shouting over one another. No, it was 12 feet long. 12, it was 16 feet, no mistakes. 18 and tall as a barn is the example here. All of this is shouted one over another, much spilling and consuming of ale, and I assume standing on tables and chairs and pounding of fist on the tabletop. Let me not shake my entire desk though.
No, you can. I think that's getting into it, right? Yeah. In fact, so when I conceived of this, that's the image I had in mind. These kind of sailors in a tavern who are sharing these stories of this place they've been. But John Bannister, who did some dev reading for me, he brought up that that's not a setting everyone is going to love or be comfortable with. And so we mentioned at the beginning of the book that actually you might do it somewhere else. You might visit a witch's coven and they tell you the different visions they have of this far off land in exchange for gold. But all their visions, again, clash slightly, because when you scry, you don't get the whole picture, right?
No, you get what you asked for, and much like anything else, you asked, so like it's open to some interpretation.
Exactly, yeah. So it doesn't have to be like, the game was definitely conceived as this drunken sailors in a tavern sharing their kind of war stories and trying to outdo one another. But there's definitely other, maybe, we also talked about, it could be you go to an old library, unearth all these old documents, and again, they're slightly contradictory. I mean, we see that in the real world when you look at historical documents, they don't always tell the same story. Rather.
I mean, and there's a lot of premises to, where you could set this. Like, so you've got your bar with your sailors, you've got your library, you've got your witches' coven. I mean, you could have, all these people out in the market, and they're trying to, find like a good, we want to go on an adventure, and they're like, okay, well, what sounds cool? They're arguing over here. No, that's wrong. I've been there, and it's definitely this, and the argument just grows right there in the marketplace, at the yard, like
or
wherever.
A council meeting, or like anything like that, where
town council meetings get heated.
Exactly, yeah, exactly, because everyone thinks that their version of the story is the full and correct version, even though none of them are. Yeah, so it's really, and as well for me, that's something that we all have, that image, right? Here we're totally touching on like an aspect of the fictional sources we draw on for role-playing games, but we're all familiar with, but you don't really see in play. You meet a guy in the tavern who tells you a rumor and you go off and investigate it. You don't get 6 mildly conflicting rumors about the same thing from one person, and you don't generate those yourself.
I mean, I don't know whose games you're playing, but we definitely get mildly conflicting, greatly information.
But usually that's quite, how to explain it? It's 2 things that directly contradict, rather than like a steady layers of things in a social interaction from a group of people. You know what I mean? You speak to 2 people and they give you directly opposite things. This is meant to be a bit more.
Dwarf. No, he was a halfling.
Exactly. Yeah, this is meant to be a bit more like puts it on the players in this one discussion.
Oh goodness. And I think, like that's kind of like the cool thing, because you can really just like put as much ludicrousness in there as you want, and then like you've gotten all these rumors or everything, and like maybe they're really bad, but then you determine like, all right, so you've heard all of this stuff, but like how true is it? You got a scale of like, actually it's a lot better than that, or Oh dear, I regret to inform you.
That
Um,
you think you're a whole lot worse.
that was just the beginning.
Hmm. Well, I mean, when you said earlier about, oh, you kind of came to the coast and met the people there and they were quite nice, but you didn't go further inland. I think that's exactly it. You hear this story, but when you get there, it can't always be true, and I kind of decided it was more fun for it to skew towards being worse.
It typically is in life. Like, typically, if you hear something and you're like, it's kind of unbelievable, just a smidge, you're like, okay, surely, there's a misunderstanding and it's actually better than that because that sounds bad. And you get there and you're like, was indeed understanding.
Yeah, in the example with the size, like they argue about whether it's 12 or 15 or 18, but you arrive and actually it turns out it's 22 feet tall. That's supposed to be, well, it's
20
far
feet,
worse.
22 feet tall, and that's terrible. It's awful. It's worse. But then it turns out, like, this big, horrible monster that they've all been like, it's huge. You're never gonna beat it. It's just a big.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of room for interpretation, and especially because the players produce this map that has all
Yes.
this content on, but some of it is inaccurate, and of course the GM is able to take away what they have created as a starting point and think about ways to connect it or make it interesting or make it untrue. It really, for a GM who likes to prep and wants to come back 3 weeks later with an enormous binder full of encounters they've planned, this is still entirely doable. It's just that the players will brainstorm the list of things at the beginning.
This is a novel concept.
I know. I've never had a GM binder, but I gather they're popular.
And I think that's kind of like one of the things that I've liked about this because, like, as a GM, you don't have to go into this with like, notebooks full of like, okay, I've determined all these things that exist in the world. It's just a matter of when, or potentially if, you encounter them. No, here it's like, all right, the world is a blank slate. How weird are we gonna make it?
And you share the responsibility. I've met a lot of people in the past who don't GM and are scared of it because they're responsible for creating it all and making sure it all makes sense. And if players don't like it, they'll feel bad. And I don't want people to feel like that,
Yeah, I
I want.
mean, and nobody who's running a game, they're like here, they're like, okay, so I want my players to show up at my table and have an absolute. No. Well, okay, I shouldn't say nobody is like that. There are indeed a small number of people out in the world who want to players and like I don't
So
understand it.
it's a bit of an aside, but I can tell you a story related to this that I heard today whilst trying to set up a game. Um, so I moved house just before the pandemic, and I'm so now where things are mostly okay here. I'm trying to organise my first face-to-face gaming group here, and I asked in a local game store's Discord, and one guy replied saying, "Oh, I'm potentially interested, but in the last group I joined, I made my character, and then I was locked in a cage for an hour, and the others were supposed to rescue me, but they didn't, and I died, and I never got to play." And I was just like,
What?
"What? Well, that will not happen if you come and play with me, because I'd actually like you to play the game, and I wouldn't make you make a character and then never even get to perform an action with them before they die." Like,
It's just
was
it's like absolutely like why even invite the person to play?
yeah. And why didn't the players decide it was worth rescuing you, or that why didn't the GM just let you out of the cage? Or I don't. So many questions that I can't ask, but I was horrified, and so I kind of sent them a message saying, "Look, like that will not happen.
Yeah, it's like
Nothing like
I
that will
will
happen."
uh pinky promise you
No, but
have
yeah,
it in
you're right. There are
writing.
people out there who
Ah,
miserable time.
I can't even imagine. Well, So We Sail Beyond is your latest product. But as I said, you have a bunch of stuff out there. Got dozens of things. So you've got, let's see, uh 18 things here at the top, which are kind of their own games, and then you have a vast amount of um Wretched and
But
Alone
those
games
are,
listed on there.
yeah, that is because I collected those on that page. They're not all published by me, but because I
Yes.
published the SRP for that, and then we ran the jam, I wanted that collection visible somewhere. Yeah, but there's only one in that collection, maybe two, that I published.
That's what I was looking at. I was like, these actually are all credited. Most other people, Loverboy, Keegan, Chris Bissett, of course. Um,
Yeah.
how odd that he would make something for Wretched and Alone.
How odd. Yeah, how odd. I'm
Uh,
curious. Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, and while you didn't produce all of these, I think it's important there though that like you did kind of put on the game jam there, which is an important thing as a creator, that you can do. You have an idea, and like you're like, but I bet other people also have really great ideas that would go with this game. Like,
Yeah, well, when Chris released The Wretched, I said, "Hey, these mechanics fit an idea I've got on the drawing board, so I'd like to use them. But if I'm going to use them, why don't I write a document that lets other people do that?" And then I wrote the SRD, and we did the jam, and it was.
quite
We thought
popular.
maybe two or three of the people would join in.
No, it was
But
it was quite popular. Chris and I spoke not terribly long ago, and one of the reasonings we were why it was so popular is because well, it was very, I don't know, timely game discussing like the horrors of like being alone with nothing but yourself and your own thoughts, like right as we were all going into a pandemic and had been kind of forced to be stranded at home alone with our thoughts.
yeah,
And so people were like,
yeah, like I think and not so a solo, a good solo game came along, and then the tools to make your own came along when people were trapped at home on their own. I think it was well timed and has been successful as a result, for
yeah,
sure.
that, and the subject matter of wretched wretched being, like what do you do when you're trapped out there alone and things are very bleak, and people had a lot of time to think about exactly that subject. God, the world is suddenly rather bleak, and um well, fortunately, I can still order groceries, or it would have been really bad, but, like, what do people do in these situations? They talk to themselves, they try to get themselves through it, they try to so, like, people were like, it was like, I think you had excellent timing.
And like a hyper exaggerated version of that worked, right? Because that's what the games are. Richard and Alone games are mostly hyper exaggerated versions of what it is like to be alone, trapped somewhere.
Yes.
And we were all exploring that in our own scale, and so these really kind of epic fiction, I think, like level tellings of those stories made sense to people, right?
Yeah, and, I think I mean, it was kind of a beautiful thing that we could take this
Mm.
plenty of this wretched situation that we all found ourselves in and make
To
beautiful
me,
stuff from
an
it.
interesting thing about all that is at this point, I think that is perhaps what Chris and I are perhaps both most well known for. Would him for him it would be the Wretched, and me it would be the SRD and the Sealed Library. And certainly, I can't speak for Chris, but for me, that represents one facet of what I've tried to do. And actually, the things I do most often, I am less well known for, but the axe I have to grind design wise has been eclipsed by that because of the timeliness of it.
Well, that is the unfortunate thing about being a game designer and a public facing figure, is that you don't really get to pick and choose what you're known for.
Yeah,
Unfortunately.
yeah, you don't.
All you're gonna have to do is you're gonna have to do something really great and exceedingly timely to kind of overshadow that. But you've got, like I said, though, still outside of the game jam stuff, you've got another dozen and a half things that cover
Yeah.
a variety of topics, from Cup of the Good Egg, a museum liberating egg crawl.
Oh yeah, that was for Chris's Adventure Jam, and that was just a bit of fun. In fact, it was a split on my itch, and I do need to kind of redo the page actually and organize things a bit better now that I've got a few more, I guess you could call them headline products out. I've got a fair few things on there that are free or very cheap that are kind of a fun 1 or 2 page thing, and that's what Cup of the God Egg is for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's you've got an encounter table, a few random items, an item generator, and a little bit of advice to help you make it into a runnable adventure, because it doesn't come with a map. You're supposed to just go and find a museum map and use that.
So I've been to a fair number of museums over the past year since the museums reopened, and like some museum maps are just like you're like looking at it and you're like, this would be an excellent dungeon crawl.
Exactly. Exactly. Loads of museum maps are as good as anything you could make yourself. They just need a content, and kind of Cup of the God Egg is supposed to make you do the work for the map, and then you've got random encounter tables to run on that map. That's the idea.
Yeah, and you've got random, got your glittering hordes drop table loot crawl generator.
Yeah,
just thou even loot, bro.
Yeah, that's more in the vein of We Sail Beyond. The idea there is again that it's something that a GM would normally create themselves and put hours of prep into. They could create and run at the table with their players. So you create the map of where you're going to explore at the table, and you populate it with encounters at the table, and then you just go from there. There's loot tables, there's encounter tables, and methods for doing it all live, so to speak. I think it takes a certain type of table to be willing to experiment with it, but that's what it's again supposed to be. That Have You Heard About the Beast and We Sail Beyond all sit in that kind of.
Have You Heard About the Beast was the next one that I had opened, and back to the similar concept there, game of tavern rumors and hearsay. Everyone's joining in with colorful nonsense, creating ludicrous encounters.
Yeah, that was the first one I did, and it's essentially a party game. You put folded Post-its in a bowl and draw them out. And that's entirely recognizable, I think, for people like who play party games or kind of office icebreakers. And that
would be an excellent icebreaker party game for like a gathering of designers who are like, yeah, let's get some ideas and let's make some silly stuff while we're here together.
Yeah, exactly. It just lets you make a totally silly encounter, because you can imagine going to this rural tavern and you hear all these rumors from farmers about this beast they saw at the edge of their field at night that don't make any sense. But then they're all 100% true when you actually go and fight this thing. It's as ridiculous as everybody told you it was. And that was the first one of those I did. And then I've deliberately stepped up in scale. That was for an encounter. Glittering Hordes is much more for like a location-based adventure.
Mm-hmm.
We Sail Beyond is world map scale. And now the 3 mean you could generate tons and tons of content just with the players. You wouldn't need to prep any kind of yourself, really.
Yeah, and then from there you've got, you kind of bounce around between various stuff. Like you said, don't pigeonhole yourself into any one thing. You've got realistic peasant, troika backgrounds. You're a peasant. It's awful.
Yeah, that again, like I said, that's in the a bit of fun category. One of my least favorite debates people get into in RPGs is about whether something is historically accurate.
I'm working with I guess we're gonna be friends now. It was a friend of a friend, so we were acquaintances. So now we've been talking. Who is an actual, medieval historian. That's like his jam. He's been doing it for a long time in academia, and working now on some roleplay gaming stuff, making supplements accurate medieval history and how you can put that in your games if you want.
That's cool if you approach it from, well, I actually know what I'm talking about as a starter point, and we're going to create something that is accurate to a specific time period. Whereas usually the issue I have with the debate is people say that's historically accurate, but establish no frame of reference.
It's historically accurate. When and where? When and where is very important in regards to history.
When and where. Exactly. So realistic peasant is just a joke about that, really. It's a troika background about being a medieval peasant where you're probably going to die at 25 of a tooth infection or something horrible like that.
Either from something you ate, drank, or somewhere you shouldn't have been.
Yeah, exactly. About the kind of the brutality of what life was like for many people. Yeah.
And then you kind of go back into some collaborative tiny games. What's so cool about riding bikes? Tiny collaborative game for teens.
Mm.
Get to tell stories, childhood movies, all of that cool stuff that we're talking about anyway.
Yeah, and that and space is rubbish and I want to go home.
Yes.
Those were both connected to a game jam that Jared ran, where you really have you have character creation and a resolution mechanism, and that's kind of about it.
Okay.
And the rest of it you're supposed to come up with on your own. And Jared started that with What's So Cool About Outer Space, and there was a jam of games around that, and those are the two entries I put into that. They're kind of both games I'd like to revisit and add a bit more content to, but I also don't know when I'd ever get around to doing that.
You just add it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, near the bottom and hope it reaches the top one day.
Yeah. You've got some more Troika related stuff, Vampire, Vexatious Tale of Love and Bureaucracy. Merc's Peerage of the Manifold Years.
Yeah,
And
that was it's funny that Chris keeps going up. Me, Chris, and Cody Falk each did a set of 6 backgrounds and sold them as a bundle, and that's what that was. We went on a run of doing some Troika stuff when we were really in love with that game. I still am, but there was a point where I was really fixated on it and like did quite a bit of stuff for it.
And then you do, of course, have more stuff for Wretched and Alone, the one you did, the Fake Hero, Real Vice. You've got your While We Wait for Death, kind of a game focused on, battlefield type thing, but not on the battlefield. Like
all the battlefield
things that happen adjacent to the battlefield.
Yeah, the idea of that is I think the scene I could reference that would most speak to the most people is it's near the end of Game of Thrones, and there's like a whole episode that's just the night before a battle and they all sit around talking. It's that storytelling experience that you're sat at a campfire and you know that tomorrow you're entering a dungeon, stepping onto a battlefield, and you might not leave. And what do you talk about? What do you talk about in that moment?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of inspiration from the last Thrones, even though it is arguably awful the way they ended it.
Well, yeah, that wasn't my inspiration, but it's the
concept. It was a very good example of it, though. That's popular culture.
A lot of people know that scene, and that's what it's kind of a.
There were some really horrid things while they were like doing some of the battlefield scenes, such as the person that gets burned in an attempt to garner luck. I'm gonna not say that in case somebody still hasn't seen it.
Yeah, when's the statute of limitations on spoilers for that? That's a tough one.
Yeah,
We're not hunting.
that's kind of a big moment though, that where like your opinion on people like changes. Like, wow,
Yeah,
like I kind of didn't like you, but like right now, like I would murder you personally.
yeah. It does. Yeah, yeah. Spoilers can get very emotionally involved.
Yeah. Well, and the characters in the show too, the same feelings apply to them. Like some of those characters before, but after that scene, I was like, man, are top of the ship. And then you of course have the sealed library, which is what your itch store is named after.
Yeah. Well, so Sealed Library was a name first, and I wanted to do a game around the idea. And then when Chris wrote The Wretched, it was like, yes, that is the engine for this idea. And it was one of those kind of nice catalytic moments where an idea that's not quite filled in fills in and becomes complete. That was that moment when Wretched came out.
And I personally kind of like the whole concept behind this. The concept here is like you're the sole surviving librarian of the greatest library in history, Library of Alexandria, whatever you pick it, make it up.
Yeah.
And it's fallen to invaders. Like, what do you? How do you like pick? What do you save? What are you saving for? How do you save yourself? Like,
And which do you prioritize? Like, well, I mean, in the game, you have chosen to prioritize saving knowledge, but like, you have to keep yourself alive in order to succeed at that. Like, yeah, that I wanted a game that appealed to a very different sensibility to slaying dragons. And I think it does. I've had lots of people who are like history nerds or book collectors or like
playing dragons is arguably the exact opposite of knowledge. All dragons are ancient and like they
very
know
much.
a lot of stuff. And what did you just do? You didn't even ask them to write it down before you murdered them.
Yeah, you just destroyed it along with them. It's terrible. Yeah, yeah, exactly. That kind of. I think people think of RPGs as combat games, right? That's what the
I mean, that is the popular misconception.
Yeah, it's the public facing aspect of them, right? People think of like fantasy combat when they think of RPGs. And
Yeah.
so Field Library is a very different sensibility, and it did definitely strike a chord with a different set of people that I was pleased with.
I do enjoy and appreciate like how as tabletop games have gained more presence like online with big production shows that like some of those do combat, but a lot of them like it's really about like the role play, like bringing a lot of the focus back to the role play and like how are their characters interacting with one another? What are the love stories? What are the dramas? What are the friendships, the enemies, and then
Mm.
like while we're, going through this life story, we may also be fighting creatures here and there.
Yeah,
But mostly, this actual play campaign is about the interaction between these characters on the screen.
you're right, and I think that the kind of rise of the internet actual play has made that play style. I can't say it didn't exist when I was a kid, because the point is that I didn't know it existed when I was a kid, because when I played RPGs as a teenager, we didn't have the internet. How we played was how we played, because we'd read the books, the three of us, and we played together.
And the books most certainly emphasize combat.
Yeah, and even though we did other things, I think like we only had ourselves as a reference point. We were some kids in a small town where we were the only people we knew who played RPGs. We couldn't ask another group how they did it. And I think that it's really nice to see that a different play style has blossomed because of the internet. I think that's really positive.
Yeah. So, you've got a lot of stuff, you've got a lot of things here, and you do a lot with game jams. But like, how do you really how do you really just kind of like go out there and be like, all right, this is gonna be the next thing that I make. I've come up with a new idea. I mean, I know that's a big question.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I'd say the main thing I do to tame that process and try and make it manageable is I put everything that I actually think I would like to write that I come up with into a Trello card.
But you use a digital tracking tool, unlike like all of us other poor people who are like, I've got 27 notebooks.
See, that's exactly what I sort of found. Like for me, that didn't tame it; it just channeled it into notebooks. That then, if I wanted to know exactly, if I wanted to know, oh, where's that thing about? The answer was, I have no idea. And using Trello's helped me tame, like it's a deliberate word, that process.
You mean your notebook system?
Exactly.
They
Especially because
they each have a purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, what Trello lets me do is it lets me reorder things. So you say, oh, what's my next project? That changes fairly regularly, but
Yes.
Trello lets me change and organize that and keep track of it and discipline myself a little bit so that I don't just work on whatever I'm thinking about today and never finishing the thing. So Trello is a big part of taming that process. How do I come up with ideas? Usually it is when two things clash and I wind up thinking about, well, how would you do that? So for instance, recently I have played Brindlewood Bay. Are you familiar with Brindlewood Bay? Yeah, cool. Been playing Brindlewood Bay, and also then for whatever reason there seems to be this thing on Twitter about Columbo and watching Columbo that I don't really I haven't to the origins of, but lots of people are talking about Columbo. And that set me thinking about, well, hang on, in Columbo, you see who the killer is at the start. How would you do that in a game? Like, and in fact, I talked earlier about taking something that's in fiction, in the fiction we draw on, and trying to recreate it in games. Often that is where I start, is something I see in the fiction, and I say, oh, I can't think of a game that does this very well. And then I wind up trying to make it, or at least think about it.
And I think that's a very popular inspiration is from pop culture. Twitter has become an increasingly valuable source of inspiration to people as you grow your community of fellow designers. And I mean, I'm sure at this point we all know at least one person who's done a really great thing based entirely upon a Twitter shitpost. Entirely.
Yeah, definitely. 100%. I think, in fact, I think Twitter was the best thing I did coming into RPGs because of the networking it has allowed me to do.
I've been kind of puzzling out, like, my most popular shitpost recently was about liking tabletop games and putting it on my dating profile, and then people trying to gatekeep.
Yeah, but as soon as you put it on, they want a purity test you, right?
Yeah, they're like, but like somebody's like, well, I just don't put it on my profile, and I'm like, right, but like I feel like that would be an incredibly large lie by omission because like it's my hobby, it's how I met my friends, it's how I schedule my vacation days, it's my side hustle. It's tangentially related to all of my other side hustles.
It's pretty disingenuous to skip it, right?
Yeah, like, so I can't just be like, oh, I do some games.
Yeah. The thing is, that kind of thing's always a double-edged sword, right? Because you put it on your profile, and it means you probably lose some attention from people who aren't into it, and that's good. But you also gain some unwanted attention from the people who want a purity test or gatekeep you out of your own interest when they haven't met you yet. And you'd think wanted to make a good impression, right?
That was my initial thought when like people started being like this, and I'm like, aren't you all on the dating apps to either make friends or to make, potential romantic connections? I'm not really sure, like, I'm not inside your brain, so I'm not following the logic process on how, like, harassing someone is achieving your goal.
Can't say that I am either. But I am hardly surprised. Like I think it's still the case that gatekeeping is a bigger problem for us than it is for some hobbies. A friend recently was in
A great game could be made around gatekeeping.
you think that's doable? Well,
Oh, people would get heated about it.
I think for a lot of people it'd be too sensitive a topic. It'd be one of those things that's like, oh, I don't want to engage with that because
It would have to definitely be something with like that's like intentionally like comedic. We're going like over the top. Like, oh, you like X? Well, how about, outlandish.
yeah. Maybe it could be about then like trying to wing it in a community you are being kept out of, where you actually don't know what you're talking about, but you've just got to try and waffle your way through it. And rather than it being about games, it could be about, I don't know,
Literally anything.
like like in Catch Me If You Can, right? Where he shows up and he's like, yes, I am a doctor. And he just has to try and act like he's a doctor. I think that could be.
Well, acting like you're a doctor situations. But the general idea there, yeah, like you're trying to like okay, so like I'm not an expert, like like people, games, comics, movies, TV, like literally anything that you enjoy. Someone will about like okay, so I'm not an expert, but like I've experienced a small slice of it, and I really loved that. So like I want to get more into it, and you're like here like I've built a gate, and you're like, all right, what am I gonna do to like just walk around?
Yeah, what am I gonna do to just?
How do I become aware that there is a gate? There is no fence. All I have to do is literally walk around you.
Yeah, speak to anybody else in the hobby who has, like you say about the dating thing, who has their own self-interest at heart. Because really, when somebody is interested in your hobby, more people being interested in it is a positive thing.
Exactly. And
Right?
that's
Especially,
that's my soapbox that I'm always on.
yeah, especially in a hobby where, like, if you're talking about RPGs, like, we're not awash with cash. Like, things are doing all right, growing. Like, more people being interested in it and bringing more money in would be good for a lot of us. Right?
Yeah. If you want to be a designer, you want people interested in the hobby, so there's more potential customers. Not not that it's all about the almighty dollar, but you're not gonna make any if there's no one interested in the things to buy it.
Yeah. Also, like there's it being about the dollar to the extent that it means you can afford to pursue it and as a career and eat. I don't think any designers I know aspire to buy, $1 million penthouse with games. They would like to be able to work full time and pay rent and go on holiday once a year. Like,
I mean, I'm sure they would think it was brilliant if somehow it ended up that way, but no.
yeah, but
We've
it's
all
not
got
because
very
of rewards.
manageable. I would like to make enough money from this to pay people to put art into stuff that I can sell so that I can make money, pay people to art.
Yeah, exactly. And to pay that artist at a rate where if that was their full-time job, it would be sustainable. Not
Yeah. Oh,
pay.
yes. No, I absolutely like gonna commission an artist. I am operating under the assumption that like, okay, so sure, maybe it took them 2 hours to draw it, but I wouldn't just bill them based on that 2 hours. I'd bill them based on the fact that like they went to school for this long. They've been doing this many. So you have to assume that like, okay, had they not been doing that, it would have taken them a week to do it. So let's pay them based on that because it's not just like the actual like I mean, sure, I can write you up an NPC in like, you know, and a location in like an hour, but like I do not want to be paid for an hour's work.
No, because the number of hours you have put in being able to do that in an hour is enormous, right?
Yes. The amount of knowledge that I have researched, the sheer number of hours that we've put into like having the knowledge base in order to be able to do these things.
Mm.
Like, like it's all deserving of pay. But that said, like, so pop culture, and all of that, great inspiration and generally very good places to find those conflicts or opposing ideas to where you're like, okay, but like, what if we could overcome that? What if we could, like those are very fertile grounds for game ideas. Um, and then like obviously you've got kind of a few game systems that you have tended to do jams for. Um, I guess though, when determining like a game system, like that kind of works itself out. Like either an idea kind of lends itself to like a solo journaling game, or
Yeah. I mean, I think for some things it does, but I think for sometimes there's a need to find techniques, if that makes sense.
mhm,
Like a lot of this deliberately collaborative stuff, most RPGs don't really have tools for it built in. Um, most of what I've put in stuff like We Sail Beyond, it's from my background in teaching and training.
mhm,
Things we do as like class or training room activities where that are about idea generation and recording and iterating on those ideas and exploring them. And I'm kind of mad libbing in RPG words instead of like soft skills or language words that and doing it that way. I think that's like I think it is very significant to have another discipline you are interested in and know about that you can draw on for games, right?
yes,
What
and I completely agree. Like most of the people that I know and I like love their work, I can see the influence from whatever else it is. Um,
Hmm,
like people who are in the education profession, you can see like they take great care to explain stuff, but not in such detail as to like where it gets like tedious and you're just, eyes glazed over, you've lost the entire class. Like
yeah,
that's the difference between like someone who's been in education and is used to dealing with that versus someone who's like, okay, I've never taught anyone anything, but I'm going to do 182 pages on how to build a character in your that
yeah.
that's
Well, a
just
good teacher reading the room, right?
is I mean, I'm sure there are 182 wonderful. Can we validate?
Can we not? Can we not do all of it? Yeah.
Can we trim that down to like, 18?
Tops.
I, you know, um but yeah, and then you can also see, like people who have that background in people have that background in like I mean, okay, for instance, example, Ed Greenwood's a librarian. I'm sure this would shock anyone who's read all of his stuff because like it gets into like, about like knowledge being important and being able to go and find stuff readily available out in the world. The answers exist and you're like, yeah, you are
You're you're grinding an axe that very much represents something you elsewhere, right?
and you see these things and like after you connect those dots, you're like, yeah. So like I completely agree. And it is very important. Like, um personally, um I love spreadsheets, which are in essence very large tables. So you may or may not find, nicely laid out tables of easily indexable information and stuff that I create because the world needs more nice tables.
Format you gel well with, right? Yeah.
I love tables. Good tables are helpful. Tables are also let you know, like, this is clearly what's here on this section of thing. If you want to use it, great. If you don't, skip this big whole table.
Skip the whole thing. Yeah, that's true. There's a very
Unlike
significant
a block of text, like a big wall of text, you're like, do I need to read this? I can't tell.
navigable, right? A table.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which really gets you into the whole like box text versus bullet points argument, and
Yeah. So a question on which do you think is more off-putting to what you might call a casual reader? You know, like if you open an RPG book, you haven't really bought one before, and you see loads of text or loads of tables, like I wonder how different casual readers react to that. Because it's definitely the case that experienced RPG people like tables, right?
experience. I mean, I think they both have their place. And you know, there are definitely like middle grounds. Like so, for instance, I'm gonna use this example because I had it in our Quest, the RPG. Um, Rather than doing like a bunch of like wall of text or a bunch of tables, offers you a bunch of little headed sections in place of a table because they have a little bit more information that you need to fit on one line.
But there's no long columns there, right? Because that's the classic kind of, for me, the dreaded thing in an RPG is that when I open it up and it's a 2-column layout, and you can open a double page spread where there's just 4 solid columns of text with no anything else in.
Yeah, I'm sure that I can find an example of that as well.
Yeah, you see that. I think that's intimidating, and I've read a lot of RPG books. I'm fairly sure that a lot of casual readers find that intimidating.
And you know, I agree. You know, there's got to be nice middle ground, and that's something that we're actually seeing a lot more now, especially like as people try to make stuff more accessible. It's like that big huge wall of two pages of text that I just showed you like would be a lot less intimidating if it simply had some more white space.
Yeah, I think that there are more people who are good at or aware they need to be good at info design coming into the hobby, because 20 years ago or longer, the tools to do it well and lay things out well were more difficult to access, and info design was difficult. And I think that people are getting better at that. That's what Quest.
I was about to say 20 years ago and hold this up, but I was like, no, this is from 1992. That's a little more. No, we still have walls of text.
Exactly.
They did at least put a nice big border around it, so it's not quite so. But this is from an adventure mod. That's it meant to be a little bit more, you know, easily digestible, rather than like
quickly referenceable. I would say is a very significant thing, right?
Yeah, all of the things that you might need to reference have red headings. So if you want to go to the section for room description or the section for the big bad evil guy, you know, you that. But it's still just like a lot of text. You know, that's something that like indie designers are definitely kind of like leading the way and paving it on. Like, it doesn't need to be the standard 5th edition layout format. Like, there are easier, nicer, more digestible, more accessible ways to present this information so that people don't open the book and they're like, oh,
I mean, most of
do I need to read all of this?
Most of the big publishers who publish like big hardbacks are doing something that they've been doing since 1982-ish, right? Like big hardbacks as like the default format.
Yeah.
And I think it's getting creakier because of digital tools, because of like online play, because of the way other ways the hobby has moved forward. For me, the big hardback, it's less and less appealing. I buy fewer and fewer books in big hardback format now than I ever did before. I buy more small weird stuff.
I I love books. I love having them in my hand, so I still really adore like big hardbacks. But I do like that we're getting this is a newer D&D book. Oh, I've been doing some D&D work, so they're all handy nearby. But we are getting into the more tables, and this is just like a random chapter, not like a chapter for like creating your own demi-plane or your own villain or whatever. In which case, in those chapters, you do expect like tables. That's the thing now. But like in a random, section about a place, there's text, bullet points, pictures, tables. We're getting a good mix now. We're getting into something more digestible, and I think that's good. And I think, people are leading the way, people like you with like, bright like layout, design, really eye-catching, really kind of non-conforming to standards. Like if you just scroll through We Sail Beyond, like you're very hard pressed to find any 4 pages in a row that are formatted the same way.
Oh yeah, every thing is every spread in We Sail Beyond is formatted like individually and laid out individually. I guess you can't do that in a 250-page book.
I will say some of the spreads in We Sail Beyond make Acrobat Reader freak out. There's just so many elements in them that it's like,
Oh, you get like this kind of where it pops in, right? It's also the case that the PDF we released was very, so we finished it ready to send to print, and then basically we cut the bleeds off and released that, and that means it's a little heavier than it should be really, and there will be a somewhat more svelte and easy to render version coming out.
Acrobat Reader's like, I was rendering all of this, but I've gotten tired and I'm out of memory.
Yeah, we've noticed that.
But that issue aside though, knowing that like if you just keep scrolling, like every new spread is going to be something visually different, both makes it like appealing to continue to scroll through it. You're not like, oh, it's gonna be 2 more pages of just like white page with text, or sorry, parchment background with text right here. You're like, okay, you can also, file that away. You're like, all right, the bright pink page that had hexes all on one side and had the heading on the other side, that was where this information was. So you can easily like have that recollection callback of like this visual cue.
I think also when you're selling a small product at a premium price, because obviously the print cost of a D&D of a huge like hardback is way lower per page than what I pay to print a couple of 100 copies of something. Yeah, and then the shipping and everything at every stage. A big hardback has economies of scale. I do not. And you have to make these small booklets an appealing object in a different way, right?
Yes.
It's not appealing like a great giant slab of a hardback tome with a ribbon in, because it can't be. You've got to make it. Yeah, me too. I dig a ribbon, but I can't afford ribbons.
And they're and as Chris said, they're a pain in the ass to string yourself.
Yeah, and like, I can't like an offset print or a sewn hardback. Those things cost such a large amount of money to do at all. The most like one-man band or like one-person band, I should say, like indie creators just can't do it.
No, it's definitely more popular and more prevalent to see the little zine formats. You've got, the a lot of them even have the staple binding.
Yeah, because like we have to. For me, like being, I don't need to name the numbers, but for me, printing We Sail Beyond and Have You Heard About the Beast to fulfill my Kickstarter and have some stock of, and then printing a couple of other things alongside, that is going to empty the business of money. I will have almost nothing in my account after printing and shipping those. I will have stock that means I can make some money. But even printing, I'll be printing about 1,000 zines, 1,000 booklets. That will empty the liquid money in my business.
Yeah.
You know,
Printing is expensive, and then that's just printing. In this day and age, let's not even get into shipping.
yeah, exactly. Like I'm going to be taking money from people very directly to ship, but if I had to cover that with money in the business, it just isn't there. Like, you know, you have to get, I think you have to get quite big in order to start having a pool of money that you can dip into for large print runs.
I think, you know, we are out of time. You know, final kind of closing here on this subject.
Cool.
I think that, you know, one of the more important things right now that we're facing in the industry is getting the customer base to realize the value of the product. Like, that wasn't a D&D book right there, but you know, even Dungeons and Dragons, that book, any of their books, any of their $50 hardcover books should not be $50. It should cost.
Yeah, yeah, and to understand that what the economies of scale are, and you know what a creative needs to get paid in order to live in a kind of sensible manner. Like, yeah, it's getting people to see that value. I hope that the price rises we're seeing now from things like cardboard shortages will force people to reevaluate, but they might also result in budget belt tightening. It's hard to see. Right?
I cardboard short. That actually was one of my favorite lines from the wildly successful Avatar RPG most recent update. Is that you've been so successful that our biggest concern now is cardboard short.
Yeah,
We
I
might
mean,
we might not be able to print all of these books.
yeah, because it's all allocated, right? Everything that's coming in has already been bought by somebody else. Like they've got to find, well, $10 million Kickstarter. But do you reckon they're spending $1 million on paper? Like, got to find $1 million worth of the same paper somewhere. You know, I can see that when there's already shortages, that's a task.
Yes, exactly. Alrighty. Well, thank you again so much for being on the show. This discussion has been absolutely wonderful. I think we're actually a couple minutes already over the hour, but you know, it's fine. Where can everyone find you online, find your stuff, play games with you, whatever it is that people have the ability to do?
So you can pretty much always find at Sealed Library is going to be what you might call the business side of things, sealedlibrary.io, sealedlibrary.com, at Sealed Library on Instagram or Twitter. And if you are looking for me rather than like my work, you'll pretty much always find me as I am Matt Sanders nearly everywhere. Again, like there is a website that where it was already gone when I signed up. So instead on there I am Who is Matt Sanders? But that's only one.
How dare they? Whoever did that.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I reckon he probably hates me more because he's got it in one place and can't get it anywhere else, whereas I've got it nearly everywhere.
Well, again, thank you so much for being on today. It's absolutely delightful. Again, everyone, comments, thoughts, whatever, constructive criticism, have them, can all be directed to either of us via our Twitters there. As always, you can find me on the internet as well, at Jenny Loveday on all the things except YouTube. Working on that one. See, I've been saying that now for like 6 months. Everybody, it's Google. It's
taking you a long time to track down the other Ginny Loveday. Is it?
No, the worst part is it's my other account, and I'm trying to argue with them.
Oh, to unlock it, right?
To give it to me on the account that I use now, rather than the email address that I set up in like grade.
And no longer have access to. Yeah, no, that's
not only that, but I don't want. No. I have access to it, but I don't want everything linked to that email. Yeah. So pretty exciting guest list coming up. We've got a lot of people. We've got let's see, after the 19th. We have Casper and Martin Kanstrup. And then we have it's really throwing me off having to find my calendar later. Then we have David Hartledge, and then I need to book some more people for October and November. So I've got a whole list of right now that I am composed to. So by the time that this airs, hopefully some of you will have emails from me, and I'll have October, November, and December scheduled out. So looking very much forward to that. Got the rest of September scheduled out, but that doesn't do me a lot of good to announce that right now. It'll already be done. But that is it for this episode of the Designer's Den. And you can, find us here, or find me here at least next week at the same time. Matt will be asleep then.
True.
Very true. All right, everybody. Well, that's it for today. Good night, everyone.
Bye.